Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Edinburgh process for subnational and local governments on the development of the Convention on Biological Diversity post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I am Renata Gomez from Region 4, and I will be chairing this regional information session on behalf of the Scottish Government and the Edinburgh process partners. Sue Campbell and John Mouet, who are with me today as well, will be representing the Scottish Government and will be acting as moderators for today's session. Mayra Garcia Blasquez, who's also from Region 4, will be assisting us. Given that this session is for the South America region, we are very happy to announce that you may raise your questions in Spanish in the chat box, and then we will respond to them also in the chat box, or maybe I can address them as well. Puesto que la sesión de hoy será para la región de América del Sur, vamos a dar la oportunidad de que algunas de vuestras preguntas escritas por el chat box sean en español y las contestaremos en el chat box en español y yo las repetiré y traduciré en inglés para el resto de quienes están presentes. Okay, so the aim of the session is to take you through what we are calling the Edinburgh process and to explain how you can contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the updated plan of action for subnational governments, cities and other local authorities, and the Edinburgh Declaration through this process. It is very important that you as local and subnational leaders take an active role and engage in and participate in this process, because it is crucial to develop a strong regional positions from our constituencies and to find support from like-minded parties. We know that action takes place at the local and subnational levels of government, and this process is a great opportunity for you to raise your voice and influence the new global framework for biodiversity. So moving on, I will now like to ask Sue Campbell to provide us with some background information on the Edinburgh process and to also take us through some housekeeping rules. Also, very importantly, she would like to share with you all a very important welcome message from Mrs. Rosianna Cunningham, Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform from the Scottish Government. So, Sue, over to you.
Thank you very much, Renata. It's lovely to have you chair the session on our behalf today. Yeah, just like to remind participants of just some basic housekeeping rules for this session. If you're not speaking, I'd be really grateful if you could mute yourself so that we can reduce the background noise. We'll be asking for questions at fixed points during the presentation. So if you could save your questions for then, we'll address them at those points. You can either use the raise your hand function, which can be found in the participants list. And you can ask your question then. The chair will invite you to ask the question. You can also use the chat function. And for any questions that are in the chat that we are not able to answer within the allotted time of the session, if we have a lot of questions, then we can pick those up after this session and address them after the session. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. We'll move on to welcome you all to the process. Obviously, when we had planned this meeting as a physical meeting in Edinburgh at our Botanic Garden, and our Cabinet Secretary for the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, Ms. Rosanna Cunningham, MSP, would have liked to have addressed you in person and to highlight how the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the role of subnational and local governments is a priority for Scotland. However, with the international crisis that's been caused by COVID-19, in common with other governments across the world, the Scottish Government has been focusing efforts on addressing the impacts of COVID. So unfortunately, Ms Cunningham can't participate in this process, but she very much supports the process. On behalf of the Scottish Government, I'd like to thank you all for taking part in these online sessions. We're delighted that although we can't be together in Edinburgh, that we find a way of continuing this important work. We recognise that biodiversity, global biodiversity is under threat, and this really is an international challenge which will require an international solution. Subnational governments and local governments play a vital role in protecting biodiversity. So it's absolutely right that the views of that level of government and the expertise that they contain help to inform future action. And so that's why Scotland's delighted to be leading this consultation process along with all our partners. We want to thank you again for taking part in this process, in this online session, and we look forward to working with you all as we protect the richness and biodiversity of our planet in the months and the years ahead. Thank you very much, Renata.
Thanks to you, Sue. Indeed, it's a very important message that you just delivered to us. The times are challenging, but we were able to adapt and bring to you all this very important consultation process. Well, moving on, we would like to continue by bringing you a short opening statement from Mrs. Giotti Matur-Philippe, who is the Divisional Director at the CBD Secretariat. Mrs. Matur-Philippe will set out the Edinburgh process and its importance to the convention. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mrs. Matur-Philippe.
Dear participants, on behalf of the Acting Executive Secretary, I would like to thank the governments of Scotland and the United Kingdom as organisers of this web consultation for allowing me to share a few words with you from the perspective of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I would also like to thank ICLEI and Regions 4 for their support to this process. This consultation arose from a lesson the Convention learned about 10 years ago. The campaign for life on Earth cannot be won without the full participation of all levels of government, from federal to national to subnational and local. And cities increasingly are part of the problem, but also the solution. Let's consider some facts. By 2030, nearly two-thirds of the world's population will be living in cities, tripling the urban coverage, which stands today at 3% to 9%. Recent research indicates that 16% of existing key biodiversity areas will be impacted by this urban expansion within the next 10 years. This will have a serious impact on biodiversity. However, cities are also a source of innovation in transport, industry, and medicine, and even agriculture. So thereby, this could have a positive impact on nature. Since 2007, the CBD Secretariat has been working with parties, UNO agencies, and international organizations, networks and associations of subnational and local governments to address this realization. And since 2008, parallel summits have been regularly held at the Conference of the Parties. In 2010, at COP10, a plan of action for the engagement of subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities was endorsed. The Global Partnership and the advisory committees started working. Regular updates and publications on this work have been provided since through Nature articles, NUCA, and CBOs. Subnational and local action is essential for reasons such as harmonization of policies and resources across all levels of government, management of ecosystems and natural resources, and productive land and seascapes, as well as connectivity of protected areas, often fall to subnational governments. Urban-rural linkages, teleconnections related to food and water security, fiber, energy and health are often managed at subnational and local levels. Urban expansion and sprawl itself will affect key biodiversity areas, but the consumption footprint of cities goes much beyond. We're just beginning to measure and test their governance. The post-2020's ambitious goals can only be met with the full support and engagement of local and subnational governments. We hope and count on your support. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was a very important message indeed on the background of the work that many of us as organizations and partners to the Edinburgh process have been working on. Mrs. Giotti mentioned very key elements that are going to be essential for this for the Edinburgh process, and we will speak on depth on the subnational plan of action, for example. She mentioned it, and a milestone decision that recognized the importance of local and subnational governments. So to present a little bit more, who are the Edinburgh process partners, and to introduce a little bit of us involved in this process that is of course led by the Scottish Government. We'll begin by saying who I am and who I represent. As I said, I'm Renata Gomez. I'm the Biodiversity Program Manager at Region 4. That is an association of subnational governments working together with the hope of stopping biodiversity loss, elevating the commitment of subnational governments to adapt to climate change and create enabling conditions for sustainable development. We are currently coordinating the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments to the CBD, together with the leadership of the Government of Quebec. We are very honored to be part of this process and to welcome you all to today's informative session. The Edinburgh process has also been possible through the participation and support of many other partners, who we have here today, some of them. I would like to invite them to highlight their own reasons to be involved in this very important process, their hopes and aims for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in a very briefly manner. So firstly, I would like to invite Rachel Levesque from the Government of Quebec and co-coordinator of the Advisory Committee, like I said. Rachel, welcome.
Bonjour, thank you very much, Renata. Thank you for chairing this. I also wish to thank the Government of Scotland to hold this workshop virtually. I think that we can see clearly now more than ever how important it is to continue addressing biodiversity loss. My name is Rachel Levesque, so I'm working for the Government of Quebec. I'm an international relations advisor to the CBD for the Government of Quebec, but I am here representing the Advisory Committee of Subnational Government for Biodiversity. It's a permanent structure that aims to bring the subnational government's voice into the CBD. And as Renata mentioned, it is coordinated by Regions 4 and the Government of Quebec. There are currently 20 members actively involved and 3 partners association. The Advisory Committee has been actively engaged throughout the whole consultation and negotiation process for a new ambitious new plan for nature. And we believe that this workshop today and throughout the next week will be very important, since this biodiversity framework is intended to be inclusive and participatory and actively engage all levels of government. And as we are currently working on a renewed and stepped up decision for local and subnational government that I'll have the pleasure to present later, we'll be looking forward our exchanges and your contribution to the upcoming week into this online consultative process to make sure that we apply the same whole of government approach, that the one that we are asking the CBD to put forward. And maybe to conclude, I think that we all thought that 2020 will be a super year for biodiversity with the adoption of an ambitious new plan for nature. I think that the same nature is sending us the message that we are more vulnerable than we thought. And I think that while 2020 will now be the opportunity for us to build resilience and solidarity, we have to also make sure to be ready in 2021 for the adoption of even more needed New Deal for Nature. So I thank you all for being here today. Merci.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Roberto Rinaldi from the European Committee of the Regions. Roberto, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Renata. Buenos días a todas y todos desde Bruselas. Greetings to all from Brussels. The Committee of the Regions is the official voice of cities and regions in the policy-making process of the European Union, where 70%, 70, of the legislation is implemented by cities and regions. It is therefore strategic for us and for all European cities and regions to participate in the Edinburgh process, and I hope that this is the case for you too. We need a framework that recognizes the role of local and subnational governments in both the development, implementation, and monitoring of biodiversity action. And we need the support of you and of all other local and subnational governments in the Edinburgh process to achieve this recognition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I would also like to welcome to today's session Mr. Terry Kisuna from the Aichi Prefecture and representing the group of leading subnational governments toward the Aichi biodiversity targets. Teru, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Renata. I talk on behalf of GOLD, the group of leading subnational government toward Aichi biodiversity, now consisting of 9 subnational governments, including Campeche, São Paulo, Quebec, and Catalonia. In 2010, COP10 held in Aichi adopted the Aichi targets and the plan of action on subnational governments for 2020. Subnational and local government are so pivotal players, especially in mainstreaming of biodiversity. We must expand our initiative further beyond 2020. Updating the plan of action and enhancing the support of the parties are essential for that. That's why GOLD support the Edinburgh process, which should provide the best opportunity for us to form our globally united voice to deliver to COP15. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Teru. I would finally like to welcome Sofia Picarelli from ICLEI Latin America. Thank you very much, Sofia, for being here today. The floor is yours. Perhaps if Sofia is having trouble, I saw that she connected, but perhaps Timothy, oh, there you are.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you so much for the invitation. We are very glad to be part of this process. I'm representing here ICLEI South America Secretariat. I am Biodiversity and Climate Change Manager of ICLEI South America, and our region has played an important role, especially Brazil, on the previous roadmap for the current Global Biodiversity Strategic Plan and Aichi targets, especially in the recognition of the role of subnational and local authorities as strategic partners for the implementation of the global targets, reflected on the current decision 1022. And we are working here in our region with important partners to reinforce the current roadmap for the post-2020 global framework. And especially since last year, we have supported some relevant regional events, such as the event organized in July 2019 on the role of metropolitan regions on the biodiversity conservation, organized by the metropolitan area of the Abura Valley in Colombia in partnership with Expertise France, Also, we join CAPLAC, the Latin America IUCN Congress on Protected Areas, reinforcing the voice and the role of local governments on protected areas. And also, early this year, we organized the Bio 2020 event in partnership with the state of São Paulo, also with the support of Expertise France and Renata and many other partners were here, engaging relevant national stakeholders to really increase the local and subnational movements. And also we are constantly disclosing for our city networks, the Cities with Nature platform. And we do hope that we raise the ambition and also concrete actions on the ground in our cities and our countries here. So thank you.
Thanks to you, Sophia. Thank you. All right, I would now like to hand it over to Sue Campbell, who will give us a little bit of background information on where we are today and what it took us to be here. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Renata. My computer has just decided to switch itself off. So if you can bear with me for just 1 second. There we go. So yeah, the Edinburgh process has been developed because of the rapidly changing global situation with COVID-19. So along with our partners, we've had to work to deliver the engagement of subnational and local governments in the post-2020 framework development from a face-to-face meeting to a online process. We originally planned a 3-day workshop in our Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, and I know that many of you were planning to attend. But now with our partners, we've gone through several different plans before settling on this Edinburgh process, which we'll present to you today. The new format is completely online, and it includes more traditional consultation processes gathered through written responses. And we are also arranging a range of online meetings and thematic webinars. So what we hope is that this online approach will allow you to fully participate in the process, even if we can all be together in my beautiful city of Edinburgh. So the Edinburgh process timeline is outlined on this next slide. And as you can see, it runs right up to COP15, which will take place in Kunming in 2021. That date is still to be confirmed, but we've set out the important milestones on the timeline here. Obviously, you've all registered on Attendify to be able to attend this information session. And I hope you've also had the opportunity to look at the online consultation documents, which became available on the 30th of April. We've also made available the copy of the Zero Draft Post-2020 Framework, which I'm sure you're already all familiar with. We're holding these regional information sessions across this week, and then those will be closely followed by a series of thematic webinars, which will outline sort of specific, we'll focus on specific topics in those seminars. And then in late June, we'll have a second feedback session, regional sessions, similar to these. Before, and then after that, we'll be submitting the final report of the Edinburgh process into upcoming CBD meetings. If I just go back to the thematic webinars, I'll tell you a bit more about them. We're supplementing our online consultations with these seminars, which will be held over the next 5 weeks and covering the topics that you see here. These sessions are being coordinated and run with our Edinburgh Process partners, and they'll allow for technical discussions that might be helpful in informing your responses to the consultation. This is an opportunity for knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing, and the outputs created through these sessions will also inform the final Edinburgh Process report, which will be presented to the CBD. We'll be making available the meeting links for these webinar sessions through our Attendify app, and we'll also be recording these sessions and uploading them to our YouTube channel. And that reminds me to then go on to tell you about the digital platforms that we're using throughout this Edinburgh process. Our main communications platform is Attendify. So many of you will already, well, you'll all already be familiar with the Attendify app. It's free to use and can be accessed through the smartphone or through your browser on your desktop computer. If you use the smartphone version, there is more functionality with that. We do encourage you to access this app and use it on a regular basis. The app contains all the information about the Edinburgh process, such as the schedule, the speakers, our partner organisations. There's links to the consultation documents, and there's YouTube video links. There's also a link to Twitter feeds, so that if you're using our Twitter handle, which is #post2020Edinburgh, you'll find links to tweets available on the Attendify app. So using this app, you can keep up to date with upcoming online sessions and any new information or changes that we might need to make during the process. The advantage to this app is that it also has a social media function, and we hope to use this to develop an Edinburgh Process community. The activity stream allows participants to post messages and for others to be able to comment and like your posts. So in using the smartphone app, you can use it kind of like a Facebook type function. You can also directly connect to other participants through the smartphone app. So it's possible to contact others if you want more information about anything you hear from them, or to follow up on questions and issues that come up during the process. So really strongly encourage you to use the Attendify app, and if you are able to use this through your smartphone, we'll be keeping it up to date, and you should look at it regularly. I also mentioned the YouTube channel there. So as part of the process, we've also established this channel called Subnational Workshop, and you can access the channel also through Attendify. There's an excellent information video on the YouTube channel on the evidence base for the post-2020 framework. And this was recorded by Andy Purvis from IPBES. And if you haven't watched it, it's a really excellent video, so I would recommend it. There's also recordings there from our partners, our Edinburgh Process partners, whom you've already heard a little bit from. If you want to find out more, you can find that information on the YouTube channel. So we'll be posting recordings of the online information sessions and also the thematic webinars through this channel. And the videos that are presented in this presentation today are also available on the YouTube channel. So you can keep yourself up to date using Attendify and using YouTube. And if you need any help with any of the technology we're using, please do contact the Edinburgh Process team on the email address, which will be shown at the end of the presentation, and we'll try to help you where we can. Thanks very much. I'll hand you back to Renata.
Thank you very much, Sue. Very useful information indeed, and very clear. We are going to have a little bit of time for questions and comments later on, but yes, very useful to know the means and the ways, the channels that we can use to stay connected and to stay engaged in this process. So this first series of regional online consultations have been developed to introduce the consultative process for subnational and local governments on their role in the CBD post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as we have mentioned. We will also aim to introduce a review on the plan of action on subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities for biodiversity. The milestone decision that we keep mentioning because it's so important, that was adopted at the CBD COP10 in Nagoya 2010 under decision 10/22. We will also use this opportunity to introduce, of course, the Edinburgh Declaration, one of the main outcomes of this whole process, and we will set out how you can engage with the online consultation going forward. So it's important to know that the outputs of this consultation will feed directly into the development of the new global framework for biodiversity. And not only that, and more importantly even, the associated subnational and local government planning for the next 10 years. Your contributions to this process and your voice is very important, perhaps more important than ever. This is your moment to speak up on behalf of your own regions, so your message can be brought to the attention to the CBD parties, and you don't miss the opportunity to influence the new global biodiversity framework. I would now like to open the floor for questions and comments. Remember that you can electronically raise your hand and share your thoughts with us. You may also write on the chat box in Spanish your question. We will try to respond to your comments, of course. Les recuerdo que también pueden usar el chat box para escribir sus preguntas en español. Tenemos a Mayra García Blasquez de Regions 4 ayudándonos también a canalizar esas preguntas en español, a traducirlas al inglés, para que podamos también responderlas. So I will just check if there are some burning questions or hands raised. I don't see any, but if I'm missing something, Sue, please do let me know. I don't
see any hands raised yet, Renata, and don't see any questions in the chat. If there are any questions, I guess we can pick them up as we get to the next question session, or we could address them at the end.
Of course, definitely. There's plenty of time for you to send your questions. So if that is clear, I am very pleased to say that today we have Mr. Basile van Havre, one of the co-chairs of the CBD Open-Ended Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Mr. Van Havre, sorry, will, I'm missing my voice, will take, so could you please continue?
Yes, so that's okay. And I wish I could be with you to give you a glass of water. So very pleased to be, you got tea, good for you. Very pleased to be talking to you, and I believe that there is a few slides in line, so if we could get to the title slide, please. Okay, so a little bit further than I saw it. Okay, that's fine. So I just wanted to give you an overview of the process and give you a few ideas on how I think your work is important and crucial to our success, and talk a little bit on how it connects, the work of this process is connecting with the rest of the post-2020. So you may have seen some version of these slides in the past, that as we evolve, we will be evolving that process. As you know, regional consultations are done. We're well on their way into the thematic, as we can see from being in this thematic consultation. We have a current date for substandard SDI of August 17. It is increasingly likely that we are not going to be able to keep those dates, and that they may be moved to October. But nevertheless, I hesitate to make the change now. I'll wait for the official announcement. But what is important is that 6 weeks ahead And we will be publishing some indicators, and in the next slide I'll get to some detail. Then we're gonna have those sub-standard SDI discussion. Then we will be publishing draft 1.0, so the next major draft. And then we're gonna have a negotiation session called the Open-Ended Working Group 3 in Cali, in Colombia. Looking forward to be there. And then eventually in 2021 we'll get to Kunming. But if you go to the next slide, we're gonna get into a little bit more detail, and that's gonna be especially relevant to your work. So definitively, regardless of the date of the actual meeting, we will be publishing at the end of May, whether it's being 25 or a few days later, doesn't matter. A very significant piece, which is an elaboration of the goals and targets, their components, some monitoring elements, some indicators, and there will be a glossary of info baseline and link it with the SDG. And that's going to be open for 4 weeks for comments. So that's an important time, and where you will have access to those documents, and you may choose to provide some comments. At the end of that 4 weeks period, we will go back to our drawing boards and include the comment we received in a new set of documents that will be published. If the meetings hold on for August, then that's very easy, and we have the 6 weeks periods, and the documents have to be published by July 6th. If we move those meetings to October, the 6 weeks deadline is early September, and then we have 2 months where we're planning to be, we're going to try to be holding some webinars on specific subjects, some of which may be of interest to you. And I see Sue looking very carefully, because that's information I've not said in the last meeting. It's because those are decisions that were taking place a couple hours ago. So you get the very latest. And apologies to colleagues that have not heard that earlier. So basically, it's a very dynamic process. Keep track of our blog entries on the CBD website, and we will be publishing on social medias some indication on whether there is new information. So we're developing that. On the SDI side, definitively we're looking at the same time of process. So here you see a very simple process with an extended review. Now we're thinking about also doing a peer review and some online consultations through July and August, with a publication later if the meetings are also in October. But that gives you an idea of where we are. If we can go to the following slide, and then here some ideas on the importance of your role. I don't need to convince you. You were in Nairobi at Open-Ended Working Group 1, and it was very, very clear that there is no success without the engagement of some national government. I think Latin America has a strong history of engagement, starting from Mexico with the EGLOS, that goes a long way to show the way many years ago, going to the work done in Colombia, in Sao Paulo, and in many other regions of South America, in Uruguay as well. I don't know if there's anybody from Uruguay. So many, many examples of your role. In a number of countries, including mine, the responsibility for landscape management and planning, and for the protection and conservation of space reside with some national governments. Most of the science and knowledge is generated at that level, so it's very important. And then when you focus to the quality of life, most people live in urban environment, and Jyoti have talked about that. And our municipal governments are playing a very key role in working on that. Now, if you look at the change, and I'll be, so you'll be seeing that in the draft, we're considering some very big social and economic change of planning with a new way of looking at things. And that includes sustainable production and consumption. And then many of the levers for those change exist at the subnational level. So absolutely no doubt that you have a place at the table. In fact, my vision is that when we finish and we start signing on the final document in Kunming, my hope is that our Chinese host will want to have you on board and present in the session, not in a separate forum. Finally, in conclusion, some detail on how you can input, and I'm now on the last slide. Collaboration, I think you need to develop some strong position among yourselves. So that's what you're doing through this process. And it's important to note that we're in a different situation now. We're not in the first part of the consultation where the co-chairs were free to consult and listen to anybody. We're now in a negotiation process where the input we're taking on is either coming through the formal negotiation meeting or from the subsidiary body meeting. So it is important that you get your input through parties, so work with governments that share your views. It is important that you participate and be present at the subsidiary body and at the open-ended working group, and make sure that you have parties that are lined up to support your intervention. So next slide, and that's the last one. That's completed the very quick summary of your positioning of your process. This is the second meeting I am taking, and I'm delighted to be able to listen to your views in the presentation, and I'm looking forward to listen to the rest of the discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you, Renata.
Thank you, Mr. Van Havre, for such a very clear and important message on the relevance of working together, strengthening our position, and finding those like-minded parties that you mentioned to support our views and be able to effectively contribute to the development of the framework. I would like now to move on and invite John Muat, also from the Scottish Government, to introduce the remaining slides in this section that will cover the zero draft of the framework, of course, and also the monitoring framework, and introduce the structure for you. Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you, Renata. Yes, I'd just like to add a few words to what Basile has already said, mostly focusing on the consultation document on the zero draft that you will find in Attendify, and just to highlight that when you consider the zero draft within that consultation document, it's important not only to be thinking about the action targets and the overall goals, but also to give equal consideration to the monitoring framework. These are maybe two separate annexes, but they really are one document, and sometimes the elements may be in the monitoring framework or they may be in the goals, but it's important to take those both into consideration when you're looking at your response. And the zero draft itself is split into two different sections. So sections B and D set out the overall goals and the action targets that states are negotiating at the moment. And then the sections E to H relate to issues around implementation, including enabling conditions, resource mobilization, monitoring, reporting, and communication. We just want to highlight at the moment that, as Basile already said, we're moved into a negotiating phase at the moment, and therefore we're not seeking detailed text on the targets at the moment, but what we're really looking for is your views on the overall suitability of the goals and targets, if there are any gaps or deficiencies from a subnational perspective, or if there's anywhere where you think the ambition should be higher. And in considering the framework and the indicators, it's important to bear in mind that it's one of the fundamental principles of the convention and the application of the ecosystem approach is principle 2, which states that management should be decentralized to the lowest appropriate level, aiming at greater efficiency, effectiveness, equity, and involving all stakeholders, using local knowledge, encouraging greater ownership, participation, and balancing local interests with the wider public interest. So this is a fundamental approach, and you should bear this in mind when looking at the monitoring framework. You will, as I said, find the consultation document itself on Attendify. It outlines the zero draft, but also signposts the discussions that were held at the second open-ended working group in Rome in February, which Basil and Francis have been busy working on and incorporating into the future work. The actual consultation document itself is through a Google form, so you'll be able to enter that electronically and we'll receive that back here. And the consultation is already open, as has been said, and will run until the 29th of May. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Very clear indeed. We will now allow some time for a little bit of reflection on what we just discussed. You may now raise your questions and comments on what we just discussed, but also on the process on how to participate. So not only we will be responding questions if you have on the zero draft, but also on the monitoring framework. Like John very well said, we're going to be expecting a lot more engagement and some deep and written comments as part of this consultation throughout the Attendify. So please remember that that is the principal means of participation. We'll be consulting you also on topics related to the your take, for example, on the 2030 goals, the mission and action targets, whether you feel they address the key biodiversity issues for subnational and local governments. We'll also be discussing on that consultation, on that written Google form that John mentioned, if you think that the level of ambition is sufficient to deliver the requirements for nature and people at the subnational and local levels, for example. Also, of course, the monitoring framework and your views and perspective on the elements of implementation and capacity building, whether they provide a sufficient framework for you, subnational and local governments to implement the framework. Okay, so if there are no hands raised and no burning questions.
I have a quick question for Basil, if that's okay.
Of course.
Basil, you highlighted in this upcoming peer review opportunity for the kind of updated targets and the monitoring elements prior to the subsidy meeting. I take it that will be open to states CBD observers through the website, or is that a more open process? How will that work? Just so we can make sure that as part of the Edinburgh process, we can take on people's views and feed them into that process if necessary. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Basil.
Hi, John.
Yeah. So my understanding is this is an open process, so I encourage you to take part in this process and provide your comments.
Okay, thank you.
There was perhaps somebody else wanting to speak at this moment. I heard the microphone open, no? Okay.
Renata?
Yes?
This is Oliver, just wanting to know if this is a good point to make a more general set of comments. I don't know if there will be another step. You let me know when that is most appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Oliver. Well, you may go ahead if it's in relation to the zero draft in the monitoring framework. Please go ahead and share your views.
It is in relation to the zero draft, and it is also in relation to how this hangs together with the objective of this consultation, because you see, it is a bit of a historical justice that we are going back to a good interaction between the government of Scotland and the UK. because exactly 10 years ago, when the adoption of this plan of action was proposed, it was the government of the UK who made a very, very relevant contribution through Eric Blanco at the time. So it's interesting, but we've had 10 years, and I just want to call attention to the progress. So there's more than 50% of the reports and the biodiversity strategies and action plans that come in today, they also include already references to articulation and harmonization. So, you know, the global framework that we just reviewed, thanks also to the excellent work of the co-chairs. And let me tell you that they know what they're talking about, because Francis personally made sure that there was a lot of contributions to the guidelines that ICLEI and the Secretariat published on the harmonization between levels of governance. And Canada, being a federal state, is an example, because at least in terms of biodiversity, I can tell you that the city, the province, and the national government or the federal government work perfectly together. And then when we look at the today's targets, the zero draft targets, there is a mention to landscapes. Subnational governments manage landscapes. There is a mention to bringing the benefits of nature, of green areas, to urban dwellers and citizens in cities. There is a mention of, there's a whole target on consumption. And as Basile already indicated, let me take my home country and city as an example. In São Paulo, there is an urban market called Sergesp. It is so big because the conurbation around São Paulo is so big that it sells 12% of produce in the Mercosur region, this one market. And the management of the urban-rural linkages linked to food security here are so strong that the only manager of this facility had to be the state of São Paulo. So you see state and city combining on consumption. Quickly also, I wanted to say that probably these urban-rural linkages will be essential for the implementation of the framework. I think this is becoming very clear also with what is coming out with IPBS. Have a look at that. There's a lot of interesting things about direct and indirect drivers and food nexus that are going to come out. They were going to be very relevant. And maybe my last point on this was to say that the big lesson of this consultation needs to be, how are we going to cooperate much better using the ecosystem approach that we all know that works in terms of achieving all the framework targets and future indicators as they evolve? I think that's the question. So thanks.
Thanks to you, Oliver. Always on point. Very important what you mentioned, and the relevance of ecosystem-based approaches and the direct link of those approaches to local and subnational governments and subnational leadership as a whole. All right, so moving on, I would like to now follow up with a session that will focus on the review and the updating of the Plan of Action on Subnational Governments, Cities, and Other Local Authorities, which was, as we keep mentioning, adopted in COP10. I would like to welcome and to invite Rachel Levesque from the Government of Quebec to share us her take on the review and of course to take us through this section. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Renata. So yes, this is my great pleasure today to discuss this very great exercise that we want to start with you on the review of the Plan of Action of Subnational Governments, Cities, and Other Local Authority. As we already mentioned, this is the current plan, the current decision we have within the CBD to make sure that subnational government and local authority are integrated and that they are able to put into action within the CBD. It was adopted at the COP10 in Nagoya. It's under decision 1022. So next slide, please. I think we were very grateful to collaborate with the government of Scotland to make sure that this plan of action and all of the exercise we wanted to do was included into the Edinburgh process. I think it's very interesting. Just to put a bit more of context on what we're currently doing, I think that the first thing we wanted to do was to look back on the past 10 years on the current plan of action and to see what we achieved and if what we did was worth it in the end, if the decision really allowed us to be more engaged and involved within the CBD. This was the leading exercise by ICLE, and it was a collaborative work with a range of network of local and national governments, so the Committee of Region, the goals, the advisory committee, Regions for all of the partners that I presented earlier. I think that the first thing we did, and I invite you to consult the document because everything that we've been working on is published on the Edinburgh process website. So we went back into the last decade and we highlighted the achievement that can be attributed directly and indirectly to the adoption of the plan of action. And we thought it would be very important to capture the element of the plan of action that worked and what did not. So what could be improved. We did a review on what's been done by many different actions at a whole range of levels, being global, national, international, and local. All the collaboration we've been able to do with party, with the Secretariat, with the academic sector, and so on. So it includes a wide range of initiatives and activities. It's been a very interesting process, and I think that we couldn't start working on a new decision, on a new plan of action without doing this exercise to see what we did achieve and where we're at right now. So next slide. And that being said, now I think that we're more than ready to look ahead. I think that this review of past achievement has allowed us to build a very compelling case for more active participation of local and national government. I think that one of the most interesting points that we've been able to see is how we have to engage ourselves as integral part of government. I think that in the last 10 years, we've been advocating a lot for the importance, the role of local and national government. I think we've had amazing opportunities within the CBD, and we've been well integrated along other major stakeholders, very important stakeholders such as IPLC, youth, women, and so on. I think that now we're ready to take a step further and engage as being part of government, part of the parties of the CBD. And I think also one of the case we thought would be interesting is that how we can really be included in the implementing, monitoring, and reporting of the post-2020 framework. And I think that the discussion that are occurring right now, that happened in Rome a few weeks ago, were pointing into that direction. So I think that this is a very good process for us to be engaged. As it is written, the format still has to be decided, but I think that as of now we're calling for a dedicated decision on the role and contribution of our constituencies. On a renewed and significantly stepped up plan of action, I think that we're ready to have something very clear with a strong reference to our active participation. I think that we've been doing and what all of our partners have been doing in the past year are allowing us to be at that stage. And I also want to raise to your attention that we've been also been doing with ICLE as well a 10-point framework for local and national government action to provide some guidance on how the local and national government participation can be included throughout all of the process that is happening right now and that Basil described. Next slide. We had some good brainstorming and good discussion on the elements we want to have include in those stepped up decisions. So I think we want to be realistic and feasible, aligning ourselves with the goals of the new framework. I think it will be important to have mobilization and distribution of resources for increased investment in biodiversity action at all levels, including national and local. We want to support and improve the decision making on better access to biodiversity data, monitoring system, and also supporting the progress that we are already achieving through the initiatives that are already existing, such as the City with Nature platform that is listed in the slide. So next slide, please. Also, I think that it will be very important, and I've seen it in some of the comments, that the multi-level governance and multi-level cooperation will be a core element of what we want to put forward. I think this is a very important concept. We want to bring capacity building and also tailoring communication, education, awareness, as we've been doing the last 10 years. And so those are elements to be included, but I think that why this Edinburgh process is so important is that we've been doing this, we've put the table, and now I think that we will be very interested for you to provide what for your constituency, for your local and national government are elements that you also want to be included. What are the elements that are important to you? And I think that if we work together, we can make a very inclusive new plan of action that will be of interest for all of this framework. And to conclude, as next steps, so as I was saying, we will be looking for your contribution throughout all of the Edinburgh process. Will be incorporated into what we've been working on so far, and we'll present it at the second online regional information session that will be occurring later on. We'll be submitting it to the Secretariat, and also we'll be presenting it at the SBI and subsidiary bodies that will be occurring in a few months. So I hope this was, we wanted to make a brief presentation on what we've been working on so far. Everything is available for consultation on the website and on the app. Please don't hesitate to engage with us. It will be a pleasure to collect your input and see how we can better work together. And so yeah, so I am available for questions, but also Renata and Roberto and Teru, that we've been working very hard on that. So thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Rachel. Just like to remind everyone that this process is open until the end of May. So you have still time to take a look at the documents that are available on the Attendify app, particularly the one that Rachel just showed us a review on, the plan of action. I would like to, at this point, take any questions or comments on what we have just discussed. So there's a question on the chat box. Do you know when the Edinburgh Declaration will be posted? I'll hand it over to the Scottish Government to respond this.
I think we can take that in the next section, because we're just going to come on to the Edinburgh Declaration.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. All right, so if there are no further questions, I will just move on to the next slide, which is indeed the Edinburgh Declaration. So as you probably know by now, the Edinburgh Declaration is a political statement that will represent the high-level aims of subnational and local governments for the post-2020 framework. The Scottish Government and the process partners involved, we have co-developed the draft of the declaration for the consideration of subnational and local governments. And we hope for the eventual adoption by many of you and those that have been, of course, involved in the process, the partners. This declaration highlights the role of subnational governments, cities, and local authorities, along with other stakeholders, as key partners in the implementation of the framework, and also highlights the key role these stakeholders play in reducing threats to biodiversity, meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, developing the right tools and innovative solutions, and also the importance of their actions in implementing and mainstreaming biodiversity across all levels of government, ensuring that support mechanisms and enabling conditions are in place to deliver upon the final targets. The draft Edinburgh Declaration will shortly be open for comments via the documents section on Attendify, and will be open until the end of May, like I said. So please go to those sections of the app and make your suggestions over there. So after the date, the Scottish Government and the Edinburgh process partners will finalize and sign the declaration so that it can be submitted to the CBD. However, the declaration will remain open for signature by other subnational and local governments right up to COP15. So we would ask that participants of this process share it widely and proudly and also encourage as many subnational and local governments as you possibly can to sign up, as of course this will increase its weight and its influence. Like we keep saying, our objective is to gather support and strengthen this voice that is also your voice if you participate through the documents and through the consultation process, to present a strong declaration at the upcoming COP15, highlighting, of course, the Edinburgh process, the declaration, and of course, finally, the support that we have gathered over the time until the COP. So I hope that this is reasonably clear. If there's anything that I'm missing, please, John, Sue, feel free to jump in and comment.
Yeah. Maybe I can just answer the question that was put in the chat about when it will be available. We would have liked to have had it available for comment at the moment, but as you know, the challenges with the COVID-19 crisis, that governments across the world are working hard to manage that crisis. So our political sign-off processes are taking a little bit longer than they would do normally, but we're not expecting any issues, and we really hope to have it online in the Attendify app very soon for people to review, to comment on, to suggest amendments to the declaration, so that we can take your views on board before we develop the final version. So we will let you know through the app, through a notification, as soon as it's available for you to review and comment upon.
Thank you, John. Indeed, it's very, like I mentioned before, the Attendify app is very easy to use. Keep an eye over there, keep your notifications on, so you can receive, as soon as the document is uploaded, a notification that will let you know when the document will be open for comments. All right, so if there are no further questions.
So there is another question being raised in the chat about the declaration, asking if national municipal networks will also be able to sign the declaration. The answer to that is yes.
In fact, if I may, this is Oliver. My suggestion is that we should probably, when we present the signatories, and therefore also at the level of collection, we should probably make different categories. Because we need small rural towns as much as we need European associations of West European cities or something like that. But they are different level of players. So maybe we could invite different players, so by the time we have a significant number of signatory, we can also distribute them among the different players. And here again, Latin America, for instance, was the one that brought up the issue of metropolitan areas, which is increasingly important. And there's also biosphere reserves and maybe other ways for cities and states to associate themselves. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Oliver. Actually, there's a follow-up question on whether national governments will also be signatories to the declaration. Sue, John, any comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's we want it to be open to everybody, but I think it may be more challenging given that the nature of the declaration will be placing an ask on state parties of the convention, so it would be difficult for them to sign up to ask themselves to do something. So I think it is mostly aimed at the subnational and local governments, but the Edinburgh process itself, of course, is also open to state parties, particularly those that have agencies that have an action to coordinate with subnational governments. So they're still free to participate in the process, but I think it may be more challenging for them to sign up to a declaration.
Of course, like we keep saying, we do need the support from like-minded parties to the convention, but perhaps the Edinburgh Declaration is not the via that we're going to gather that support, because like you very well said, it's very much directed to subnational and local governments and of course local authorities. All right,
Renata?
so moving on. Yes?
Yeah, just to clarify that last point and close it in a way that is as constructive to the convention as possible, in the view that, in fact, national governments play a critical role in making sure that the Edinburgh process and the correlations that we just clarified between the national level and global level goals and those at subnational and local, that they exist in a coherent way. So I think it's clear that there is already an initiative which ICLEI is calling Friends of Local and Subnational Action, which is the right place for national level players to congregate if they want to contribute to that. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Oliver. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so moving on, yes?
There's just a question that's been raised
Okay.
asking if there's a Friends of Cities and Regions group within the parties. Oliver might be able to, or Basile might be able to address that.
My boss does not seem to react. Oh yes, my boss reacts.
No, I think so. Oliver will have the details. When I was talking about a unified voice and seeking like-minded parties, that's what I had in mind. I think what you got is you got to organize that group of people that will be speaking with you and for you at times. So definitely looking forward to the detail. But I think and I'm thinking aloud here, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. You need to keep an open mind on the tools and value of what you want to do and the vehicle. So a declaration is a great thing, but some kind of a pledge of, and I'm taking a page from something that happened a few months ago here in this part of the world, where there is a commitment from one group and in return for what you ask the other group to do. So I will do A if you do B. So if the subnational or local government commits to a certain action and requests citizens and requests industry and national government to do other things, that can be a very powerful mechanism to leverage your engagement. Thank you.
Yeah. So if I may complement that, my point is just, I think that within the goal of advising CBD parties, which are the signatories to the convention, and therefore also to anything like the framework or to the future decision that will take the legacy of the plan of action of decision 1022 in this direction, I can share with you that yes, there is an informal discussion between a whole number of parties already going on. They have met, in fact, informally, some of them with the support of the co-chairs in Montreal. And there is an articulation because that, first of all, it makes technical sense, substantive sense. As I indicated, the parties are fully convinced. Many of the resistances that we had 10 years ago don't exist anymore. In fact, they have been substituted by proactive ideas on how this coordination can happen. But also, I think it is not as it was in the case of 1022. It was Brazil who proposed it, and then, as I said, UK and others helped. In this case, we have, in fact, a number of parties who are already discussing this. But by the very nature of the maturity of the process also, this is still in its infancy, and it hasn't yet taken any definite format. Hello.
Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Before moving on, there's another question on the chat box, but perhaps it's more efficient if we responded on the chat box itself, so we can move on and avoid running out of time. So the next video presentation, it's Mr. Oliver Hiller, like you just saw, who will show us the outcomes of the Edinburgh process, how they will be used, and of course the next steps. So welcome, Oliver, from the video recording, Oliver from the past, to share us the views. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Oliver Hillel, and I'm a program officer in the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity based in Montreal, Canada. I'd like to thank the Government of Scotland, particularly the Directorate for Environment and Forestry and Energy and Climate Change, for the initiative of organizing this Edinburgh consultation as a web-based process. I'd also like to thank the United Kingdom, ICLEI, Regions for and the group of leading subnational governments for the Aichi biodiversity targets as co-organizers of this web consultation. And I'd like to share with you a few words from the perspective of the Convention on Biological Diversity. First, I'd like to share with you 4 ways in which the outcomes of the Edinburgh process can lead and contribute to the Convention. The first one is, of course, our post-2020 instrument, the Global Covenant for the next 10 years and beyond, which relates to all the Sustainable Development Goals. The current framework already includes a lot of options for the engagement of subnational and local governments in targets, for instance, 4, which relates to pollution, 5 and 7, which relate to wildlife and wild species. A lot of that has to do with urbanization. Target 8 on agriculture and other productive landscapes, 9 on water, and 10, which is about the health value of green space and has a specific chapter about cities. Clearly, mainstreaming, which goes from targets 12, 13, 14, 17, and 18, all of them involve multi-level governance, the cooperation between governments. Second, it's the second way in which this consultation can lead or help is that subnational local issues have been incorporated into the long-term approach on mainstreaming and other parallel processes, such as, for instance, restoration, capacity building, and communications. We need to make sure that the point of view of subnational and local governments is considered also, for instance, on resource mobilization and monitoring by the use of the Singapore Index for Cities Biodiversity. The third process is that parties may consider a complementary decision under item 11, which is the item on mainstreaming, as the agenda proposed for the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, which is now scheduled from the 24th to the 29th of August in Montreal. So the idea is that all the lessons learned in implementing Decision 1022, which adopts a plan of action for the engagement of those level of governments, what are the lessons learned? How can we go and strengthen the post-2020 based on that decision through a specific decision for SBI 3? And the last mechanism is your personal contribution to the 15th conference of the parties, which is currently more or less rescheduled for the first or second quarter of 2021, still in Kunming in China. So when that happens, there will not only be the conference, but there will be the 7th Parallel Summit of Cities and Subnational Governments, which is hosted by the city of Kunming and by the province of Yunnan, along with the government of China. So we hope to see you in these 4 processes. Finally, I'd like just to leave, in the last week, we've been discussing a lot in the Secretariat the issue, of course, of the COVID-19 crisis. And I'd like to think that the discussions we've had have a lot of impact on what the Edinburgh process will be discussing. So there's 3 aspects of this crisis which I would like you to consider. The first one, it's clear that this comes from the imbalances on the management of nature. We know the origin of pandemics, so we know this has to do with unsustainable contact with wildlife and domestic animals. So it's clear that nature cannot be ignored as we try to imagine what are the roots and what are the ways that we can avoid this crisis again. We have to factor nature into it. The second point is that we're seeing that it is exactly the level of local and subnational governance that is helping people a lot in these times. So it has become even more clear that the harmonization of policies along the vertical mainstreaming axis is essential. We need to make sure that national, federal governments are saying the same things as subnational and local, as well as global, as in the UN. So this is another point that has become very clear and that might lead you to additional reflections. And the last one is that obviously the big opportunity will be the reinvestment, the restart of our economies after the COVID crisis. That's when we need to be the greenest possible. That's when we cannot afford to lose the opportunity to do things better. So it's a question of the repackaging of a reinvestment for post-COVID. With these thoughts, I'd like to leave you to consider the ways and means in which incorporating nature can help us build a stronger post-2020 global biodiversity framework. From the Secretariat, we thank you and we hope you can enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much. Again, Oliver, very interesting. The points that you mentioned in your video, it's definitely food for thought. So I invite the participants of today's session to take these reflections into consideration when moving on. So before we finalize today's session, I would like to highlight and summarize the key outputs of the Edinburgh process, which we have touched on throughout the presentation. So there are 3 main outputs. Firstly, there's the Edinburgh process report that will be finalized in time to be submitted to the Substat 24 and also to the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group. This report will cover the whole process and we have just outlined it, but it will mostly describe the outputs of this consultation on the zero draft and on the monitoring framework. Secondly, there will be an updated version of the plan of action for subnational and local governments that will be submitted to the 3rd meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation that will take place in the city of Montreal in the very last week of August, and that will be adopted later on at COP15. And finally, there is the Edinburgh Declaration itself, which will be submitted to, again, the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group, and that will remain open for signature up until COP15, like we mentioned. So through all these outputs, we're looking to set out the importance of your leadership, of the leadership of subnational government, cities, local authorities in implementing and delivering positive, transformative actions for global biodiversity and on the ground. So please stay put. Your participation is fundamental in this process. like we keep saying, your inputs are critical in shaping these three outputs, and we invite you to comment on all those three, which are now open. Just to remind you that the thematic webinars are also running over a longer time frame, and you will get more information on them through the Attendify app, so please stay connected. We will share information on the consultation feedback regional sessions in due course, of course, again, through the Attendify app. Finally, please do regularly check the app, turn on your notifications. We will be using it as our main information channel for updates and information on this process that we're beginning, that we began a couple of days ago, and that we'll continuing today, that we will continue until the end of May, so please stay connected. Would like to pass on the microphone to Sue and over to John. If there's anything you guys would like to add before continuing to the thank you slide. All right, so I would like, yeah.
I was just going to thank you, Renata, for chairing this session, and thanks to all the contributors today, those responding on chat, and also it's great to have Basile with us again today. Thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Indeed, a special thank you to Mr. Van Havre and of course to Oliver Hillel for being here today, enlightening us and showing us the way to move forward with our influence and our inputs in the CBD process. Thank you again.